Borders are set to be lifted on July 20. Do you think Queensland should be following suit?
Look, I think we must take the advice of medical officers. I'd like to see that advice made public so that it's subject to scrutiny. But this is a medical situation, and we've got to make sure that we pay heed to the medical advice. We can see the outbreak in Victoria is a result largely of people not understanding or becoming complacent in relation to things like social distancing. It is a pandemic. We need to have regard to that medical advice.
Do you think Victoria is going to be slowing down the easing of those border restrictions across the country?
Well, I think what will happen is we'll see a management around the outbreak, and if necessary, they'll then clamp down on restrictions. And the point here is we need to be nimble, and we need to apply measures depending on the circumstances in each location or across each state.
Now, when it comes to university funding, it's fallen off the top of the news bulletins from when it was announced last week. But you're still quite concerned about trying to make degrees like history, like the arts, more expensive at this time.
Well, I think one of the problems is that if you have an affinity for the humanities and you are pushed into STEM for financial reasons, you may not do very well. In fact, it might be a case where you go down a particular pathway and end up dropping out, and that's actually a situation where you waste university and public resources. We need to make sure that that people who want to study humanities are able to. I don't want to see them paying more. Look, we need to see the legislation that the government is proposing, and I think we need a lot more consultation before this ever gets to a vote of the Parliament. I'm absolutely sure there will be a Senate inquiry that will have to examine the pros and cons of what is being proposed by government. But as a starting point, I don't think you can force people to go down a particular stream if they're not comfortable. You know, people are successful when they enjoy what they do.
The government's not forcing them, though. They're just asking them to pay more, be subsidised less by the government for those degrees that do have fewer employment prospects at the end of it. Is that not sensible spending of taxpayer money?
Well, I think we have to recognise the value that people who study those humanity topics provide to the community as social workers, as people that contribute right across the spectrum, including as members of Parliament. Again, I don't want to see someone forced into a particular stream of study when they're not particularly interested and they're forced down that pathway because of money. I think, you know, charging people more for degrees is going in the wrong direction. We need to underpin our future economy with well-educated people.
And just finally, you're also interested in radioactive waste storage in South Australia. What's the latest?
Well, I think today I'll be circulating an amendment to a bill that's before the Parliament that selects Kimber as a site, Kimber here in South Australia. For me, it's the wrong location. We've got a divided community up there. We didn't achieve the broad community support that the Act required in terms of selecting a site. For me, the choice ought to be, or the Parliament now being given the choice, ought to be taken away from the current pathway, which is where landowners nominated their land knowing that they would get 4 times the value, to simply saying what is the best site. Now, if it has to be South Australia, and I note that South Australians don't want or have indicated in the past they don't want a facility here, but if it is to be here, my view is it ought to be in the Woomera Prohibited area, and which is a large remote area managed by Defence, very close to Roxby Downs, which is a uranium mining facility, where there's likely to be greater acceptance than there is in Kimber.